When I first met Bob Lazar, I was only tangentially interested in the UFO material. I had done some talk shows about it. I knew the public was interested in it, but I didn't know if I was going to be able to do the story about Area 51. Stories about Area 51 and possible alien technology there had been floating around for as long as I had lived in Las Vegas, but there had never been any thorough investigation, primarily because no one who had inside knowledge of the program had ever been willing to talk about it publicly until Bob Lazar. When I met Bob, I had a meeting with him and my news director. We asked him a lot of questions. We asked him the basics of his story. It obviously is a fantastic story, but we decided to go forward with it because Bob himself seemed so credible. It became very difficult very soon, however, because trying to verify Bob's background proved extremely difficult. It is still proving extremely difficult. For example, we quickly found out that the schools that he said he went to had no records that he was ever there. His former employers, where he said he worked, had no records that he'd ever been there. In particular, Los Alamos National Lab was the linchpin of his credibility. We thought if we could prove that he worked at Los Alamos, as he said, it must have meant that he went to school somewhere, because they don't just hire people off the street. And if he worked at Los Alamos National Lab on classified material, it made sense that he could have been hired to work at other classified programs, such as S4, Papoose Lake. However, the people at Los Alamos Lab said they had no records that he'd ever been there. They stalled on our requests for information. They wouldn't return phone calls. They wouldn't answer letters. It was as if they didn't want us to have the answers. Well, eventually, we came up with a lot of indications that Bob did work there. We found, for example, the newspaper from Los Alamos that lists him as being a physicist from the lab. We found the laboratory telephone book that lists him as being an employee at the lab. We have talked to other people at the lab who worked with him, who tell us that Bob did work on classified projects, that he was a physicist, that he was there. Just this week, almost 4 years after we first started making our inquiries at Los Alamos, we finally got someone from the lab to say, yes, Bob Lazar was here. Yes, he worked at the Mason facility. Yes, that facility did some classified work. It's taken a long time, but now we know that Bob was there. We know he had a security clearance, but we still know that there are a lot of the records that we're searching have not been produced for us. We don't know why. Well, he was upset about the security at the base. It was an oppressive place to work. He was upset that they didn't have better scientists and a more open kind of research that would allow them to finally get to the bottom of how this alien technology worked. He thought that that information should be shared with the entire world in order to benefit the entire world. At the same time, he was going through some personal crises that led to him sharing some of this information with some people that he knew. Once he got caught, he was worried about his safety. They put guns to his head. They told him he was in a heck of a lot of trouble. And I think the reason he was willing to talk to me, at least what he told me in the beginning, was he was trying to save his hide. He figured by going public that they wouldn't dare do something to him. It seems to me that for several months there, after he was talking to me, there were serious attempts to intimidate him, to keep him quiet, but he had the courage to pursue it. And I think he made the right decision, because I'm not sure that he would be alive today if he had not spoken to the television camera. Michael, I was in Las Vegas television for 10 years. I worked stories about political corruption, organized crime, illegal drugs. I've never done a story anything like this.
What convinced you most that Bob Lazar told you the truth?
Well, I'm not 100% sure about everything that he says, because as journalists, we have to be somewhat skeptical. But a couple of things stand out in my mind. Number one is that Bob has always told the same story. The story that he told me on the first day that I met him about his experiences at S4 is the same story he tells today. And most importantly, when Bob got into some legal trouble, which in the eyes of many people means that he's completely discredited, when he got into his legal trouble, he told the court system the exact same thing. Now, the courts, the interesting thing is, they're trying to verify his background, the probation department, and they said, we can't verify his background, therefore he should go to prison. Well, my response to it is, welcome to the club. You can't get any information on his background. Bob was facing up to 60 years in prison if he did not tell the truth about his background, and the story that he told to the court is the same story that he told to me on the first day and the same story that he's telling today.
After you interviewed Lazar on TV, did you come in contact with other witnesses from Area 51?
Several witnesses, more than a dozen now in total, have come forward with bits and pieces of information that confirm at least parts of what Bob said. No one has come forward with the kind of broad knowledge that he claimed, but what I have learned from these other people tends to confirm that what Bob is saying is true. The problem is that none of them have been willing to talk publicly. They will give me bits and pieces of information privately, but I'm restricted from using their names. And there's some very good reasons for that. There's been an obvious attempt to intimidate these witnesses into keeping their mouths shut. Three examples come to mind. One is a former electrical engineer who worked in the television business, who moved from Las Vegas and whom I worked with, moved to another city. He had told me by phone that he had seen a disc under a tarp in a building at Groom Lake. Well, I tried to arrange to do an interview, long-distance interview, with a camera crew in the city where he lives. He agreed to do it as long as I blacked out his face. He comes out the morning after he makes the agreement to give me this interview. There's a car sitting in front of his house, two men in suits speaking into a radio. He's not giving it much of a thought, but they followed him to work. When he gets out of work, they followed him home. No interview. He was scared. There's a woman who works in the court system here in Las Vegas, in a very responsible position, who formerly worked for a major defense contractor here in Nevada. She had sat in on meetings where she said the discussion between her employer and military officials was about wreckage from Roswell, which had been taken to Area 51, alien wreckage. She had agreed to give me this information in a private meeting that we were going to have, but the day that the meeting was supposed to happen, she didn't show up, and I found out later she'd been visited by her former employers, and they had told her she's still under oath, she could be prosecuted, but what's more, her employers hinted that harm could come to this woman or her family if she talked to me. They said, we know you do a lot of traveling, we'd hate for accidents to happen to you or your family. So she will still not talk to me now 3 years later. There was a third example, this man who performed the tax returns of persons who worked at Area 51. He had called me up on the phone at the TV station and told me he would meet and give me this information. The next day, he's visited by two men who say that they're from the Secret Service, and they wanted to ask him about his tax returns, but he said that it was his definite impression they didn't care about his tax returns. They just wanted him to shut up and not talk about Area 51. So there are a lot of people like that who have information, who could confirm Bob Lazar's story if they had the courage to come forward. I can't really blame them for not coming forward because our government or elements of our government or representatives of our government seem to use intimidation and fear tactics to keep these people quiet.
You got confirmation from the military, didn't you?
Yes, one in particular comes to mind. Now, he's not in the military, but he ran several large military research programs here in Nevada. Very top-level programs, the highest classification. This is a person from a very prominent Nevada family, well-known. It's provable where he worked and the kinds of things that he did. He also confirms that the alien technology has been in Nevada since the early 1950s, that it was even here before the base at Groom Lake was built, that one of the reasons that the Groom facility was built is in order to test this alien technology. He told me that there was a live alien in custody for a number of years, that they had difficulty communicating with the alien at first, but eventually developed some sort of a communication abilities. He is reluctant to talk. He's worried about what will happen to his family, but he has agreed to give me a videotaped deposition that would be released only after his death. And I think when that comes out, it will not only confirm what Bob Lazar had to say, but shed a great deal of light on what our military, what our government has known about the alien presence for the past 45 years, including Roswell.